The year is 1995, and a local television station in Melbourne, Australia, broadcasts a very controversial Dutch documentary titled The Death on Request, or the original Dutch title, Dood op Verzoek. And it follows this heart-wrenching story of a very ordinary, very normal man called Kees van Mendel, and his struggle with the muscle-crippling illness amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, or just simply known as motor neuron disease. And in this documentary we learn that there is no cure, and that there is no hope, and that there's no chance for this man to live. There's no chance for this man to beat this illness. And so as the documentary goes along, it follows the struggles that he and his wife go through battling this horrible disease. In the end, with the help of his local doctor, he ends his own life, and he becomes the focus of one of the most moving, powerful and dramatic documentaries about the human spirit of all time. And because you had this euthanasia element as a mechanism for his passing, which was the focus of the documentary, here you had his wife who was facilitating that, knowing that she would lose the love of her life. But she made that decision for his sake, because she loved him so much, and that to me is making the ultimate sacrifice. I was quite young then watching that, and I just remember being glued to the television screen and being almost hypnotized to the power of this unbreakable bond between these two people. And they sort of transcended the inevitable reality that because of this illness, their earthly bond, if I can call it that, was going to have to end. But spiritually they were going to be together forever. And I just remember watching that and watching the strength of the human spirit in such unthinkable conflict. And I remember thinking at that time, wow, that's a great story. So Martin Nederhorst, who was the director on the documentary, he had done such a great job in telling that story. I didn't want to revisit that. For me, it was more about the elements of undying love in unthinkable conflict, and what people would do if they were placed in a similar situation. But bringing a story about pain and suffering and death to the screen, it's never easy, particularly when it involves a topic as controversial and as powerful as euthanasia. And so for many years I kind of just let the idea simmer away in my head, and I moved on to other writing projects and other film projects. But whatever I ended up doing, it always seemed to bring me back to this fundamental idea of, how far would you go for the person that you love? Can you love someone enough to help them die, to end their suffering, knowing you would lose that person, forever? And would you make that sacrifice? And as the years went on, both ALS and the euthanasia debate kept coming up in the media, and it continues to do so today. And so a couple of years ago, I knew that it was a story that needed to be told, and so I wrote the script, and I tried very, very much to stay true to those elements which had inspired me to tell the story, watching that documentary 20 years earlier. The film is not a political statement. If the film promotes a serious and responsible discussion about the euthanasia debate, I don't think that's a bad thing. I believe that people on both sides of that debate have very valid views and sometimes very personal views. And I think you have to respect that. And whilst the film can be a great medium to educate people and to raise awareness about social issues, my personal view is that it shouldn't necessarily be used to drive home an agenda. Certainly not without at least providing a little bit of balance. And so what we're trying to do with Sometimes the Rain is to tell this story about two young people who are very much in love, and through this terrible illness, ALS, they're faced with having to make this choice about how that's going to resolve itself. And the film isn't preaching that this is the best and only way to find that absolution. The end of the film is about what these characters in this particular situation have decided is best for them. And if that raises a debate about whether that's the right or the wrong thing to do in real life, then let's have that discussion. I think that it's very easy for people to construct opinions based on objective facts without having that position ever tested subjectively. It's very easy to say this is the right thing or this is the wrong thing to do, but if you actually find yourself in that situation where you're tested by seeing someone you care about go through, the horror of an illness like ALS and seeing the pain or the suffering associated with that and seeing people who you care about go through that, I think you may find that you actually come to a different conclusion. It may not necessarily be the same conclusion that you theoretically thought was the best option. I don't believe, however, that it's my position as a filmmaker or as a storyteller to tell you what that conclusion must be or what that conclusion should be. I think that's for the individual to decide. That said, if a story like this can, even in a limited capacity, project the audience into questioning what they would do in similar circumstances and how they would handle such a conflict and frankly what decisions they would make about life and death, then that's a great thing, because we should always be challenging ourselves to be better people and to make better decisions. At its core, Sometimes the Rain is a love story. It's the story of an unbreakable bond between two young lovers who were brought together by this horrible illness, ALS, who must then ultimately make a choice as to how to find some meaning in that suffering. How do you defeat an illness for which there is no cure? How do you save the life of the person that you love when they're faced with this inevitable conclusion that all people who have been diagnosed with ALS eventually have to face? How do two people who are in love, how do they transcend this destiny in which this horrible, painful illness dictates that they're going to be torn apart? Which brings us back to the core question of how far would you go to save the person that you love? So it then becomes this story of unimaginable sacrifice and the strength of the human spirit in unthinkable conflict. Ultimately, Sometimes the Rain is a film about people. It's a story about you and me projected into the situation that none of us would ever dare want to try and imagine, to challenge us to think about what we would do given the same circumstance. And I don't want to detract from that with fancy effects or this very quick cutting shaky cam stuff that's so prevalent in so many films today. With Sometimes the Rain, I want to make a film where the story and the characters are front and center. In a sense, I almost want to go back a little bit to old school style filmmaking, where you had these wonderful performances driving a very powerful story along, rather than relying on computer imagery to wow the audience. I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with that per se. But if it's distracting from the story itself, then, in my opinion, that's kind of self-defeating. And, Sometimes the Rain just isn't that kind of story. It's all about the characters, and it's all about the people, and it's all about the emotion that they face. It's about these two, young people in love basically for the first time, and they have this curveball thrown at them that they have to face. They can't run away from it, and it's the choices that these characters end up making. The power of the love that they feel for each other that's driving the story. And as a filmmaker, that's what I want the audience to focus on and be moved by and be inspired by and of course be entertained by. For a very long time, I've been an advocate of raising awareness about mental health issues in young people and trying to highlight the challenges they face that sometimes leads them into the darkest of human experience. And a lot of projects that I've worked on in the past tend to have at its core these elements of depression, for example, and self-harm, and how people can feel incredibly alone and sometimes and being completely without hope. In Sometimes the Rain, these really important issues are canvassed again, because I feel very strongly that we need to raise as much awareness as we can about some of these challenges that the young people face today. So in that sense, yes, it already was a very personal project for me. But then just recently, I actually lost a family member who was diagnosed with ALS, with motor neuron disease, and they passed away from complications related to the illness. And because of that experience, I feel that it's very important that we portray ALS, not just as some sort of a plot device in the film, but to really highlight and depict as authentically as we possibly can, the true horror of this illness and the challenges faced not only by those who are, who suffer from it, but also, the family and friends and carers and loved ones, who are taking care of these people, on a daily basis. I think that's very important. I feel like I owe it to not only the person that I lost to ALS, but also the tens of thousands of people who are battling this illness every day, to really do it justice on screen and to portray it in, in such a way that doesn't shy away from the trauma and the horror that these people face on a daily basis. And even though that can be very confronting for some people, I feel it would be an injustice to diminish that reality in any way. And so, that's become a very personal goal of mine to get right in the film. I always felt that it's important to tell a story, and especially a story like this that confronts important social issues, that it's engaging for a very broad audience. If a film like this does promote a dialogue about some of these issues that are raised in the film, then it's important, I think, that we include the view of all people in that. Whether it's young people or old people, people from different cultures. Fixing social issues shouldn't be the domain of a sophisticated, intelligent, middle-aged viewpoint. The voice of young people, the voice of people in developing countries or from different cultures should be no less important than anyone else, because most of these social issues affect them, with equally devastating outcomes as everybody else in the world. So I wanted to make a film that encompasses as wide-reaching an audience as possible. In my opinion, some of the themes that we explore in the film, such as depression and self-harm and terminal illness and so forth, will resonate with a mature audience. While at the same time, the eyes through which we experience and explore those themes are basically two young people falling in love for the first time. So in that respect, I believe there's something in the story for everyone, and that's very much what we're hoping to do with the film. We seem to be living in this current world climate where hate and prejudice and destruction dominate not only our fictional world of film and television, but more ominously, it seems to be having such an impact on our real lives as well. And so, with this film, what we're trying to do is we're trying to tell a story that that's ultimately it's about love and heroism and truth and self-sacrifice and an understanding of the human heart. And I believe that especially in today's climate, I think it's a good time to remind people that if we put our collective minds to it, then we can actually be better, and we can make the world a better place. And I think audiences will respond to that. I think love and truth and caring and caring for each other are very primal characteristics, and it doesn't matter if you're a teenager or a senior citizen, or from what cultural or religious background that you're from. I think we can all relate to those kinds of intrinsic desires of love and happiness and sharing that with other people. I believe it's a story that is accessible to both men and women, young and old, and that it is a film for everyone, and that it's a story to be told.